Recently, I had to travel to another town. And while I was traveling, the road passed through farmlands. And I noticed that the farmers were busy harvesting. And it made me think about all that the farmers had to contend with. And it made me think about the parable of the weeds in Matthew's Gospel. And so we're going to be looking at that parable today. But I want to look at the word wheat. And from that, I've drawn up a mnemonic from the letters of the word wheat. And that's the title for my sermon for today. Watch, honor, endure, and test. And so we read from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 13, and from verse 24. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, the enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling the weeds, you may also uproot the wheat with them. Let them both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, and then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." And from verse 36, then he left the crowd and he went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." Jesus answered, "The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is at the end of the age, and the harvesters are the angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the blazing furnace, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear." The picture in this parable would be clear and very familiar to the biblical audience, and perhaps not so much to us. Tares were one of the curses and difficulties against which a farmer had to labor. They were a weed called bearded darnel. In the early stages, the tares so closely resembled the wheat that it was almost impossible to distinguish the one from the other. And when both had headed out, it was then easy to distinguish them. But by that time, their roots were so intertwined that the tares could not be weeded out without tearing the wheat out with them. The wheat and the tares could not be safely separated when both were growing. But in the end, they had to be separated because the grain of the bearded darnel is slightly poisonous. It causes dizziness and sickness and is narcotic in its effects. And even a small amount has a bitter and an unpleasant taste. In the end, it was usually separated by hand. Women have to be hired to pick the darnel grain out of the seed, which is to be milled. As a rule, the separation of the darnel from the wheat is done after the threshing. By spreading the grain out on a large tray, which is set before the women, they are able to pick out the darnel, which is a seed similar in shape and size to the wheat, but slate gray in color. So then, the darnel in its early stages was indistinguishable from the wheat. But in the end, it had to be laboriously separated from it, or the consequences were serious. The picture of a man deliberately sowing darnel in someone else's field is by no means only imagination. That was actually sometimes done. To this day in India, one of the direst threats which a man can make to his enemy is, "I will sow bad seed in your field." And so I want to look at this word wheat. Watch, honor, endure, and test. The wheat is really what we're going to do with our lives. And as Christians, it helps us grow. Watch is the word we look at first. It teaches us that there is always a hostile power in the world. There is always going to be someone waiting and seeking to destroy the good seed. Our experience is that both kinds of influence act upon our lives. The influence which helps the seed of the word to flourish and grow, and the influence which seeks to destroy the good seed before it can produce fruit at all. The lesson is that we must be forever on our guard. Friends, we need to watch. The second word that comes from the letter H is honor. It teaches us how hard it is to distinguish between those who are in the kingdom and those who are not. A man may appear to be good and may in fact be bad. A man may appear to be bad and may yet be good. There are times that we are much too quick to classify people and to label them good or bad without knowing all the facts. Have you ever heard of the story called Two Wolves? It goes like this. An old Cherokee Indian once told his grandson about a fight that was always going on inside of him. He said it was between two wolves. One was evil, anger, envy, greed, arrogance, self-pity, gossip, resentment, and false pride. The other wolf was good, joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The grandson thought about it for a moment, and then he asked his grandfather, "Which wolf do you think will win?" The old Cherokee replied, "The one I feed." And so we really have to look out and see which is which, and that involves honor. The next letter that we get in the word wheat is E for endurance. It teaches us not to be so quick with our judgments. If the reapers in this parable had their way, they would have tried to tear out the darnel, and they would have torn out the wheat as well. Judgment had to wait until the harvest time. A man in the end will be judged not by any single act or stage in his life, but by his whole life. Judgment cannot come until the end. A man may make a great mistake and then redeem himself, and by the grace of God atone for it by making the rest of his life a lovely thing. A man may live an honorable life and then in the end wreck it by all of a sudden collapse into sin. No one who sees only part of a thing can judge the whole. And no one who only knows part of a man's life can judge the whole man. Pastor Cecil Williams tells of growing up in Texas. They didn't have electric lights in the house. They had 2 oil lamps with wicks that had to be lit daily, and once they were lit, a glass shade fit over the flame and they glowed. Cecil's mother kept telling her children, You all keep the shade clean you put over the lamp. If you don't, you won't get much light. Young Cecil didn't like cleaning the lampshades. It took a long time and a lot of elbow grease to scour off the sticky grey soot. But when the shade was clean, one lamp would be bright enough to light up the whole living room. Back then, cleaning the lampshades was Cecil's job. He couldn't ask his brother or his sister to do his job for him. If he took a day off, everybody could tell. The light would be dim. Cecil Williams says he has discovered that what was true back then about lamp cleaning is also true about life. Neither you or I can ask anybody else to clean up our lives. My life, he says, belongs to me, and your life belongs to you. I have to clean my life daily, or my light won't shine, and so do you. And of course, the last two letters of our word in wheat, for letter A and T, and test. In testing, it teaches us that judgment does come in the end. Judgment is not hasty, but judgment does come. It may be that, humanly speaking, in this life, the sinner seems to escape the consequences, but there is a life to come. Of that we can be sure. It may be that, humanly speaking, goodness never seems to enter its reward, but there is a new world to redress the balance of the old. It also teaches us that the only person with the right to judge is God. It is God alone who can discern the good and the bad. It is God alone who sees all of a man and all of his life. It is God alone who judges. So then ultimately, this parable before us today teaches us two things. It is a warning not to judge people at all, and it is a warning that in the end there comes the judgment of God. God bless you. Amen.